right.
So, I guess the first thing is Brian's with Kaseya, and he's one of the multiple partners that we've got because they're great support, they're great product, the security that they bring us. And Brian, tell us a little about yourself and a little bit about Kaseya.
So yeah, I'm Brian Doty. I'm on the channel development team at Kaseya. So we get to go around and do this, which is great. It's an awesome job. Love the job. But Kaseya is a software platform for IT providers and IT departments, delivering everything from cybersecurity tools to documentation, compliance, backup, security awareness training, pen testing. I could go on and on and on about all the things, but it's a very comprehensive suite of products, and we work through partners like Solomon to provide that to the small business.
Yeah, we appreciate it. You guys have been really good for us
Yeah.
so far. And we're going to move this microphone down just a little bit.
It's not hot enough.
No, you're just not there.
Okay.
Let's try that.
Yeah, we'll do that. That works. A little better.
We really appreciate what Kaseya has brought to the table for us. And I've been talking on a microphone.
Now I hear you.
So we'll kind of start over again. Brian's with Kaseya. He's one of our partners, and he was just telling us how great his job is. Everybody heard
Love
that,
it.
but they didn't hear me. So,
And not too many people get to say they have a great job, but you know.
so what is about your job that makes it so great?
So I get to do this, number one, right? Like
Right.
that's awesome. Not a bad place to be on a Friday or a Tuesday or any day of the week, but I get to go around the country and talk to small businesses and IT providers about what it is they could be doing to improve or mitigate that risk that we were talking about earlier in the panel. Like we're talking about this risk. Well, how do you go about doing that? How do you go about solving for that problem, you know?
So,
And that's the fun part about it, you know?
so what do you tell people?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of aspects to this, right? But honestly, working with an IT provider, if you're a small business, that's what makes a lot of sense, right? I think I talked about it, I touched on it at least during the panel about, you know, all these different areas of discipline within the IT world and cybersecurity world, right? And it's like, how is a small business going to hire that one person that has expertise in all of these areas? It's just not going to happen, right? We call it a unicorn. And that's where an MSP, a managed service provider, comes in to the fold and says, hey, I have this expertise on staff and I can provide it on a fractional basis for you and mitigate that risk in your business, right? And that's what's so powerful. And when you think about it, sort of taking a step back on why this is so important, like SMBs, the small and medium businesses, they employ, I don't know, 70, 80% of the world's people. And probably similarly in GDP production, right? So SMBs are very powerful to the global economy. I would say instrumental in the global economy. And they really need players, and there's certain business functions that need outsourced. Cybersecurity is another area, and I think a lot of times SMBs overlook that, right? They'll hire the nephew, or they'll hire somebody they know, or they'll buy products off the shelf and just try to pigeonhole those products in. But what ultimately happens is they're missing that area of expertise that companies like yours can bring to the table. So that's why I love this so much. It's really it fits a grand thing, overall.
So you mentioned a unicorn, like
Yeah.
a systems administrator that's a unicorn that can do all that stuff. Let's just imagine for a moment that that person actually exists, A,
Yeah.
and B, has all the time to be able to do that
Right.
for the entire 40 hours a week and not be overrun by everything,
Right.
Let's just pretend for a moment they've got all that time.
Oh, and by the way, they crawl under desks when the PC dies, and you know what I mean. Like
Right.
they're doing like low level stuff too.
So-
That's crazy.
Let's say they're working on a virtual host server and they've got a
Yeah.
RDP environment, remote desktop environment, virtualized desktop environment, something like that.
Yeah.
So they've got to be very versed in a lot of areas beyond just the cybersecurity.
Right.
They got to know how to manage a host system,
Yeah.
the virtual systems. They've got to be able to manage the thin clients, the thick clients.
Yep.
Which these are all really fancy IT terms for saying an actual computer and then a computer that actually just runs enough to have you log into the server
Right.
and see a desktop. That's a thin client.
Right.
Because we're
Right.
trying to talk tech for the non-tech. let's define what
Yeah.
these things are.
Yeah.
But going back to that unicorn, let's say he can do all that, or she can do all that, and
Right.
she has all the time to do all that within 40 hours.
Right.
How much do you think, just reasonably speaking, and I know we're talking theoretics here,
Yeah.
but how much would that person actually cost to hire that could do all of that?
Yeah, I mean, IT directors worth their salt, right? Like worth their weight. They're going to be well into the six figures plus benefits, plus they get vacation too, right? So they get
Right.
some time off.
So somebody's got to take over while they're gone.
Right, right. What do you do then? The other thing too is like we're talking about like all these areas of expertise, but let's not forget that an internal IT director is going to have tools, and they're going to have vendors that they need to work with for various solutions that they need to provide. So they've got to go out and vet all those vendors, and they've got to have all those phone conversations and Zoom calls and demoing the product and stuff. And it's like,
So wait, you're telling me they've got more work they've got to do on top
Yeah,
of being a
it-
unicorn?
yeah,
They've got to have like
right.
the rainbow swirly unicorn horn?
yeah, and that's not to say that they're up for grabs too. That's the other piece of this. They get in your world and your accounting practice. Let's just call it that, for example, and maybe your things aren't as buttoned up, or maybe you're not giving them enough budget to do the things they want to do. But there's somebody else dangling a carrot out there in front of them, a unicorn like that, to say, hey, come be our IT director and do it over here, and we'll give you the budget. So there's like other things that are attracting these people away. And then a lot of times these guys, once they're really good at it, they kind of realize they can start their own MSP and they sort of do what you guys do anyway. It's funny how it all comes back to the simple economics of it, which is doing this on a fractional basis makes way more sense, just way more sense.
Well, and I mean, if we're talking about a unicorn with the super swirly horn,
Yeah.
you're talking somebody who you said they're making well into six figures. They've
Well
got
into-
benefits.
yep.
And so when you're talking just one person to do that, they're really expensive. If you talk multiple people to share their responsibilities, now you've got multiple salaries, right?
Right.
So I mean, I'm an MSP, so obviously I'm going to agree with you.
Yeah.
Hiring somebody fractionally is oftentimes going to be a much better benefit to your company because you don't need somebody to necessarily be doing it the entire time. We've already vetted services and products
Right.
like Kaseya
You're taking all those phone calls from those vendors and those demo requests and all that stuff, and
and ignoring a lot of them.
a little ignore. Yeah. Yeah. I've had to do that too, by the way. I was an MSP before.
Well,
It's rough.
well, you have to because
Yeah.
you get inundated with so many people trying to sell
is.
you stuff.
It is.
And you have to put together some type of process
You do.
to figure out whether somebody is even worth your time,
Right.
right? And for example, I had a company call me, and they got a hold of me on my cell phone, and I basically said, well, why are you calling me on my cell phone? And they said, well, that's the only number I have. I said, okay. And what we usually do is we tell everybody, hey, you need to email a certain email address, and if the owner's interested, they'll reach out to you. And then
Yeah.
this guy, very entrepreneur, did his job very, very well. He said, well, aren't you the owner? And
Yeah.
I was like, well, yes. He goes, so do you want me to do that? I was like, yes.
Yeah.
But he did.
Yeah.
And then he followed up with another phone call, which I didn't want to take because I just didn't want to deal with another
You wanna hear a sales
salesperson,
pitch,
let's
yeah.
be honest. But I gave him the time of day. We didn't end up buying anything from him, but I gave him the time of day
Yeah.
only because he put in the research to know that he had actually gotten a hold of the owner
Right.
when I picked up the sales line. And it just so happened I don't usually do that, but I saw
Yeah.
the number. I was like, this looks interesting. Let me pick up.
Yeah, and MSPs have to do that occasionally, like going to different shows and hearing from the vendors and things. But that's not something that your average IT director at an accounting firm or a marketing firm or some law practice or something like that, like they don't have the bandwidth to go out to the show and spend a few days and hear about the latest and greatest and stuff. They're usually like in this silo or in this vacuum in their own little world, and that's another advantage that MSPs have. Like you're dealing with a multitude of businesses, so you get to see how this affects an accounting practice or a dental office or something like that. Whereas like that person who's in that seat, all they see is what's in their four walls,
Well, here's an interesting story. So, several years ago, I brought on a new project engineer, network operations engineer, and he said, Sean, we have to use this backup software.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm really happy with what we've got. I said, here are the stipulations that I require for us to work with a different backup
Yeah.
vendor. And he said, okay. So he starts going to each one of them that he was looking at. The first one that he was really big on, it uses Windows as its base platform.
That's
and
a
I said,
problem.
no, it won't be Windows.
Yeah.
It has to be a separate operating system
Yeah.
from what the vast majority of people are using. And it was like, okay, so we can't use that one. I said, no.
Yeah.
And so he moved on to the next one,
Yeah.
and the next one, and the next one. And he found out that there are really only a handful, and I won't say two, but there are two big names in the
There are big
space.
ones, yeah.
But there are only a handful that actually use a hardened Linux kernel
Yeah.
to virtualize or to host the backup appliance.
Right.
And so he went through a whole bunch of them, and because he was very gung-ho that there was another solution out there. Turns out there was only two that we could find that were reputable and were reliable and had solid support.
Yeah.
Now, I won't say any names, but we use two of those.
That's interesting.
So,
I like that.
But moving into a little bit different area, we've talked about some of the risks before, but why in particular SMBs? Why are they at a higher risk?
They're a big target. So something like 3/4 of the ransomware attacks, don't quote me on the exact number, but it's a lot. It's a big percentage of the ransomware attacks aimed at small businesses. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why, but like mainly because they're not leading the investment that many of these larger market companies and mid-market companies are doing. But a lot of times the business owner just doesn't think that they're going to get hit. You know, they just think there's not a target on my back. But, you know, it's not as targeted. It's more of a wide cast net at that point, and you're just going to get scooped up in it. You know.
Well, and our sales executive came to me several weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago, and he said, hey, I went to see this thing, and they were talking about what's the most important thing to a business. And everybody was sitting there and they were saying, oh, it's the employees, oh, it's the
sales,
it's the workforce, it's this, it's that. And the guy said, no, it's your data.
Yeah, it's your data.
Because all those salespeople, they look at your data. All those service people, they look at your data. All those media, the marketing, et cetera, they're all staring at your data.
Yeah.
And if that data is locked up, they have no job to do.
Yeah, you're stuck, right? I mean, you can't perform most of your basic job functions anymore. I mean, like, let's face it, the reality is when we went away from paper-based processes, like, yeah, we really put ourselves in the situation, right? And so now we're relying on technology to operate our businesses. And even the small business, I mean, like, they bought into this too. I mean, there's very few small businesses still doing it on paper or manually, so to speak. So we're relying on this technology to work right for us. And that's all well and good. That's problem number one. But now it's how those tools can be leveraged against that business. And like you said, that data is what we're making decisions on. It's how we're interacting with one another. It's how you know about your customers and clients, depending on what kind of business you're in. But yeah, our data is what keeps us moving. It keeps us profitable.
So let's put it in like terms that are really low tech. Let's go back to paper, right?
Yeah.
If all of your cash receipts burned up and you ran everything by paper, you're hosed.
Yeah.
Like try reporting to the IRS of what you made last year. They're going to sit there and go, but your bank account says this.
Otherwise, yeah.
And you're telling us this, and you're going, I had a fire.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. How would you know?
The same thing kind of happens with businesses. And we didn't talk about this so much during the panel discussion, but when those cyber attacks hit and you do lose data, some of that is that financial data.
Yeah.
And while your bank account says one thing and your bank has reported one thing, but you've lost data, when you go to report it, your CPA firm only has what you have available.
Yeah.
There's a big gap, and what's the IRS going to do? They don't care.
Yeah. They want you to pay up, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So
they always get trued up. It's funny how that works, right?
yeah. And the business owner is the one who's going to be paying the piper at the end of that.
That's
regardless of what takes place.
yeah, you have no recourse if you don't have that data to support, as evidence to support it, right? Like
Right.
that's the whole thing. It's almost like you're guilty before you're proven innocent or something.
Well, we won't get into the politics
Well,
of
that's
the
a rabbit
IRS
hole.
there, but there are nuances to
Yeah,
that.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
So we like to talk about cyber resilience, and I'm a
Yes.
huge proponent or fan of having multiple redundancies, trying to
Yeah.
secure things, not to the extent that your speed, or your efficiency, your ability to perform
Right.
your work
Right.
is hampered, but you do need some type of resilience. What do you think about? What are your thoughts on that?
So for me, like when I think about cyber resilience, I'm starting with backup, and I talked about that a little bit in the panel before. But when we're talking about backup, we're not just saying like back your files up to the cloud, but really business continuity, disaster recovery. So this is not just backing your stuff up, but also a plan that goes along with it. And then there's another piece of it, which is called virtualization, and this is really what keeps your systems live so you can almost fail over to something that's fully functional, right? So if you think about having your computer running, if you think about just like a computer sitting there running and you had another computer that just mirrored that, and that computer didn't really run until you needed it to. This computer gets hosed, you can literally light this one up and it starts working again right from where you left off, or at least the last time you backed it up, right?
Right.
So that's the idea here, but you're keeping your systems operational. So if you think of like line of business applications, maybe it's payroll or things like that too. That you need to keep those operational, and this is why a lot of people have moved to the cloud. There's some benefits to doing that, but that business continuity piece still exists. You need a way to say, okay, this is hosed for whatever reason. It could be ransomware, it could be some other problem that you have, natural disaster, what have you, causing that outage or that data to be corrupt or non-usable. But if you can go to this copy, so to speak, and you're able to run it, because having the data is one thing, being able to run it is another thing. So that would extend the downtime if you had to find infrastructure to get that data to and say, okay, now we can light that up and run it and use it. Well, no, you're talking about days of additional downtime, and then you start going, well, what does that cost the business if I can't take payments from my customers, if I can't pay my employees, if I can't, do a lot of the things that I need to do on a day-to-day basis? That's going to cost a significant amount of money, perhaps even close the doors, right?
Right. Well, and we're talking about resilience, but
Yeah.
part of that also, not just from a malicious actor or a threat actor attacking your systems and encrypting the data, but
Right.
just, you mentioned it, kind of hardware failing.
Yeah.
And yes, if you've got an extended warranty, you may have a 4-hour SLA, which means that Dell or HP or IBM, Lenovo, whoever
Yeah.
will have that part to you within 4 hours. Right?
Right.
That's what they're supposed to have. That's what they promise.
Supposed to, yeah.
But that's not always the case. If they run out of the
Yeah.
parts, and we've seen some of these logistics and shipping issues,
Yeah.
getting
COVID.
things in from, COVID was a great example of, and it really put that pressure on things. I mean, I had stuff that I couldn't get for 10 months.
Right.
And what happens if that's a server component that is very unique, or maybe it's a server component that had a high failure rate? Now all of a sudden we can't get it in from wherever it's shipping in from, and you have a server that's down because of a piece of hardware that
That's a problem.
you paid for a 4-hour SLA, but now it's a 6-week.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
It is a problem, and it's additional downtime. So it's a risk to the business. Almost like, that's kind of the way I couch a lot of these things. It's like they're all risks to the business, and it's all about making sure, like, okay, well, let's mitigate that risk by having a plan for when that happens. We will do this, and if that doesn't work, we'll do this, right? And it's sitting there thinking through those scenarios that is really the important part, right? The technology is kind of, I don't want to say it's secondary, it's important, but it's really secondary to the plan you have in place.
Let me ask you this. Have you ever tried downloading something off the internet?
Yes.
How fast was it?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's pretty quick these days, but when you're talking about like corporate data and large quantities of it, you could be days.
Terabytes of
Yeah,
data could be
terabytes
days.
of data, days. I mean, yeah.
So if you're backing up to the cloud only and you have a system go down, it may take you days to recover because you're backing it up only to the cloud. That could pose a significant
It
risk.
could. Yeah, and especially since you have to get the hardware in place first. So you have to get systems in place first, and then you can start bringing everything down. So it's that process is lengthy and costly.
So when we talk about cyber resilience, in my notes here, you talk about walking before crawling.
Yeah.
And so what does that look like to you?
Yeah, so when you're thinking about like, okay, well, how can I mitigate this risk? And we talk about frameworks like NIST, and we talk about cyber liability policies and being compliant with them. And so you have to start with some basics. And one of the things that I really like is CISA Essentials. And it really is a testament to crawl before you can walk, before you can run. And running is full compliance with your insurance policy and in this framework or some framework. But like the crawling is like, well, we don't even have backup in place. We don't have multi-factor authentication in place. We don't train our users yet. So like start with some low-hanging fruit, and CISA makes those recommendations right on their website about like start here, do these things, because by the way, it doesn't matter the compliance or the cyber liability policy, it's all in the building blocks there. It's like pouring a foundation for your house. Doesn't really matter what house you're building on top of it, there needs to be a foundation.
So I'm going to go on a limb here. What does CISA mean? We talk and acronyms around here.
It's the it's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency.
Okay.
I had to really dig under the cobwebs for that one. But they can't arrest you, they can't fine you. It's an odd organization for the federal government. They're there to help.
Right.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah. No, and so then you've got NIST, which is, and correct me if I'm wrong, I get cobwebs.
Yeah.
National Institute of Science and Technology, right?
Standards. I think it's standards.
Standards.
I think
See,
it's
we follow
standards.
NIST, and I don't know.
Yeah, it's just another government acronym. But
exactly.
But that's the basis for many of the other cybersecurity frameworks we see out there, and mainly because it does a good job at mitigating risk.
Yeah. No,
Right.
we're working with CMMC, and
Yeah.
it's highly comprehensive.
Yes.
Especially when you get into level 2 and
Yeah.
even more so level 3. So yeah, it's highly comprehensive. It's definitely a framework that if you can get there, be there, you're definitely going to be covered by things.
Yeah, and you're probably ahead of the curve compared to most SMBs. Like I think a lot of people, they're going to take recommendations, they're going to take the high level stuff, but it sort of gets in the weeds after a while, you know? And so I see a lot of folks that have, 90% of the way there or whatever, and they're leaving some other things for the day they get caught with their, you know what.
Right. Well, so with NIST, CMMC, CISA, let's take a look at cyber insurance again.
Yeah.
Because we've talked about that in the panel, and it's kind of a big deal because there are a lot of nuances that the cyber policies, or just insurance companies in general, often try to use to kind of weasel their way out of having to pay.
Yeah, they'll have terminology in the questionnaires like, is multi-factor authentication enabled on all systems? That word all is inclusive of all your stuff. So if they find the one application that it's not enabled, like, does that give them an out? I don't know. Maybe that's for the courts to decide or something, but not us. But like, yeah, they're written in a way that, it's comprehensive, and there's a reason why. I mean, it's because they were paying claims. I mean, it's that simple for the insurance. And it's like, hey, when these things are in place, we're not paying claims. When these things are not in place, we're paying claims. So it makes it kind of, I don't want to say black and white for them, but it makes it pretty straightforward to.
Well, right, and we work with a couple of companies, but one of them that we're talking about is that most people don't know what some of this terminology is.
Oh,
and
right.
So some people are saying, oh yeah, I've got MFA on everything.
Yeah, and they don't know.
No, you've got it on your email.
Right.
You may have it on your line of business app, but do you have it on every single desktop?
Yeah, and that's where that's another testament to working with an IT provider and not trying to do this on your own. Like there's free resources that CISA provides. There's free resources the FBI provides. Apparently, so does TBI as well. I didn't know that. I'm from Pennsylvania, so we don't have that quite as extensively as you all have here, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But you think about it like, if I run an accounting practice and I'm an accountant or I'm a financial advisor or something like that, when am I going to carve out time and study up on this stuff so I know even what free resources I need and learning all that stuff? Like, I'm probably not going to do it. And that's why we see a low adoption rate. You need somebody like pushing that horse to the water a little bit more and making them drink almost. And that's where an IT provider such as yourself comes into play and says, hey, we could guide you through this process. And, you have your own way of working with it, but it's like, hey, we can tell you where you're misstepping or where you might be seeing some flaws. And, that's where pen testing is coming in a lot nowadays, right?
Right.
That's one of the things that we see.
And I was having a conversation earlier today before we kicked off everything where we're talking about companies that are larger that have their own internal IT. Maybe it's a one-man department, maybe it's a 2 or 3-man department, but when there's only so much that one person can do in a day, right? There's no unicorn out there that has all the time and all the knowledge. And so there are companies that we work with to help consult and kind of say, hey, these are the things that we recommend. Or they come to us and say, hey, we think we need this. What do you think? And we go, well, yes, absolutely. I'm glad you're
right
approaching that subject. And they go, hey, can you talk to our CEO about this? Definitely.
Yeah.
Right? But the thing that we see is that some companies are a little bit more afraid to talk to a consultant because, especially an MSP,
right,
because they're afraid that we want to come in and take away their job and suddenly and do all the work for them.
Right.
And the reality is that we just want to help the people make sure that they don't end up in a very bad security incident.
Yeah, absolutely. That's been the case. The internal IT folks have always kind of sort of treated outside IT companies that way, and it's a shame because I've seen a lot more collaboration over the last few years, but it's a little bit, it's a little concerning, I think, for some of them because they're like, maybe they're going to call me out on, if I'm that internal IT director and I've been taking naps every afternoon, or whatever I'm doing, but like, you might be like, oh, are they going to call me out on the way I have something configured or a product or a vendor I'm choosing to do business with and embarrass me in front of the executives in the company. So there's a lot of different fear that goes on, but at the end of the day, it's like, I think those conversations can be kept like close to home, so to speak. Like they don't need to be in the boardroom where the sausage is made. It can be kept back there in the back and let the IT company and perhaps that internal resource duke it out privately behind closed doors because, there's a difference of opinion, right? It's just like doctors have difference of opinions too. Same goes in IT, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with getting a second opinion.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. We recommend it.
Yeah.
In fact, so does NIST, so does PCI, right? That's the whole idea behind pen testing is get somebody to check your work.
Yeah.
Right? Get somebody to try to break this thing and test it out.
Yeah, we actually had another IT company that lost to us on a bid, and their parent company said, hey, we need to do a pen test per this contract we've got. And the parent company brought in the old IT company to do the pen test. And the old IT company, I guarantee, was sitting there going, we're going to get them back. Watch, these guys don't have everything in the bag. And they ran their pen test, and we came back clean, and they were
squeaky clean.
Yeah, and it was one of those. Yeah, nice try.
Yeah.
And I, as the CEO, as the guy who founded the company, it feels good to be able to sit there and go neener, neener, neener.
It should, because I can tell you, I've worked for MSPs before, and I know many of them, and I know many would not pass that test. And there's a bunch of different reasons, but it is a testament to you guys because clearly you're giving the correct advice to your clients. Clearly they're following your recommendations, right? Because that's another piece of it. right? How many times do you get pushback from clients that say, well, I know that's best practice, or I know that's what you recommend, but I don't have the budget for it, or I don't, or whatever excuse they're throwing up. And, in a way, that's like your job to be even better salesperson, even though like, I don't look at this industry as like sales and marketing kind of thing. Like it is, but it's more like accounting practices where it's like, no, these, like you're a fiduciary. I don't know what the equivalent would be in the data world. Like, what does that look like? It's like your responsibility is to protect them, and you have some risk in that too, right?
Oh yeah. No, if we don't provide sound advice, and we don't at least tell the client, hey, you need this,
Yeah.
and then tell them, look, if you don't get it, here's a variance form. Well, you can't hold us liable.
Right.
There is liability to
Yeah.
the MSP for that because A, we didn't tell you, or B, if we did tell you, there's no recognition that you were
Right.
told.
Right.
And if you then get hit with some type of cyber incident, then
Now
you
you're
can
in
come back to
trouble.
us
Yeah.
and say, well, you didn't tell me I needed anti-phishing. No,
Yeah.
no, we did, and I have a recording of it right here.
Yeah. You certainly don't want your errors and omissions policy dinged for those sorts
Yeah.
of things, right?
Yeah, and so, yeah, but you're right.
Yeah.
We carry some of that risk.
Yeah.
As much, if not more so, than the company that brought us on,
Yeah.
because we are that technical advisor. If we're not doing our job well, we can be held liable. And to your
Yeah.
point, there are a lot of MSPs out there that don't do a good job with that.
Correct.
And they're kind of just, they're rolling the dice, kind of like the client or the businesses are that aren't putting in place the necessary security policies.
Yeah.
And they don't have a system security plan in place or even imagined.
Right.
Then they bring on that risk to themselves.
I-
And cyber insurance isn't always going to cover that.
That's correct. Well, they'll find it out very quickly in that case. That's why they're written the way they are nowadays. And some of these renewals that come up, they're like 50. There's several 100-page one, but it was a mid-market company, so had some unique things. But like, I'm hearing of some really long questionnaires. They're really digging into the weeds. They want to know, the insurer wants to know that you've done everything you can to stop this from happening. And it's never 100%, never.
Right.
But they know.
Well, and the insurance companies know down to the dollar, down to the penny of
Yeah.
how much it's going to cost if you get hit
Absolutely.
versus and what their risk is. So they know
The
the odds.
actuarials do, right?
Something like that. I don't know. That's a job that I wouldn't want. That's math way out of my league. That's why I do computers. They figure it out for me.
Yeah, it's ones and zeros, right?
We're basically out of time, but
Okay.
a couple of things that we wanted to touch on real briefly
Yeah.
is SaaS applications. And you
Oh.
mentioned pen testing, but let's move on to SaaS applications.
Yeah,
'cause
SaaS
we kind of
applications.
covered the pen testing.
Yeah, that's a big one. So SaaS applications, COVID kind of started a lot of this where like folks were like, we gotta go hurry up and work from home or whatever. And it was like, however I can use my data still, but do it not inside the four walls of the office. And so you have a few things like people forgot to back up their SaaS applications. They also forgot to watch them for suspicious activity, right? Like, who's logging into these things? Who's logging into my Microsoft 365 from Uruguay? Maybe that's legit because somebody works from Uruguay, but 9 times out of 10, it's not, right? And you ought to have some tools or some way to respond to that sort of thing and say, hey, wait a minute, there's a problem here. We need to lock this down. And so, it's important to monitor those SaaS applications. It's important to remember what kind of data lives in those applications and that it's backed up, that you have a way to exfiltrate that if you need to, or if for some reason that goes sideways.
And a funny story, you said Uruguay, but I'm going to use the Bahamas and Europe for this. We had a couple of client things where we got a security alert, and one of the company employees, executive level, was on the Bahamas. And I've got their personal cell number, and the alert came through. I said, okay, guys, let me make the call, And I called them up, and they said, Sean, I don't know how you know that. That's the next level Big Brother stuff, but yes, I'm in the Bahamas, and yes, I'm checking my email. I said, okay. Enjoy your time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it was one of those, we got an alert, they brought it to my attention because of who it was, and I made the phone call, and sure enough, yes, they were in the Bahamas. right?
Yeah.
But they could have just as easily not been in the Bahamas. It's not like I get the vacation notice from our
Right.
clients, and not sitting there going, "Hey, Sean, by the way, I'm going to Australia next week, just to let
Yeah.
you know."
They're not telling you. Yeah. Yeah.
Why would they tell me that?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's my job to know where they're at, where they're not supposed to be at,
Yeah.
and when it's a little bit weird.
It's a good catch.
That's what our SOC team does.
Yeah.
Right. So
It is a good catch.
it is. It's funny that you use Uruguay, but
Yeah.
we had Bahamas, we've had the UK,
Yeah.
and fortunately, every single one of those times, it's been a legitimate alert that somebody's actually where it says
good
they
sign.
are. But at the same rate, we get those alerts, we're able to respond to them and be able to do something
have
about
to.
it if
Yeah.
necessary.
Yeah.
And even at that, the one got locked out of their account because it was one of those, well, this is really fishy.
Yeah.
They've never been to Europe before. And now they're
Yeah.
in the UK, they're in England one day and in France the next day, and then Italy the same day as France because they were traveling the train, right?
Yeah, that looks
And
funny.
It does. It looks very suspicious. If I was
Yeah.
sitting there and go, wait a minute, England, France, and then Italy, something's not right there.
Yeah.
Either they're flying really fast and really low, or
Yeah.
in my thought, they're coming off VPN anonymizers,
Right.
right? And so, yes, it's definitely a phone call we want to make. We couldn't get a hold of the person, so we started contacting other people at the company to say, hey, is this person in the office? And they
Yeah.
said, no, they're in Europe. We were like, okay.
Okay.
They probably just got on the rail and we're moving down.
Yeah.
And
Just on the train riding. Yeah.
and they were there for like a month. So we unlocked the account, got them back
Yeah.
access, and when they got back, they confirmed everything was what we suspected it to be is completely legit.
And you don't have any way of knowing, so it's like it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you can have as close a relationship with your clients as you want, but you're never really going to know that. And having the tools in place to alert you to say, hey, this could be a problem. We didn't have that for the longest time. Like, we didn't really know that kind of stuff. Now we do. And when you think about it, the tools that are available, not many people know this, but the tools that are available in SaaS applications like Microsoft 365, there's some powerful coding tools and things that IT professionals use that could be run, to use scripting and things like that. So it could potentially be a big threat if the wrong person gets in there, at least.
So we are over time right now, but
I have that effect sometimes.
Well, my wife will tell anybody there's a few things that Sean can talk about for hours.
Yeah.
One of them is soccer, and the other is IT. So
Yeah.
I'm going to leave it with this.
Okay.
Verify, don't trust. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, I think that absolutely does.
All
I
right.
like that.
Well, Brian, thank you for joining us. Thank you for making the trip in. I know you were up at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Just getting to the
Late
hotel,
night.
and then you were up early trying to meet with people here in town. So I really appreciate you making the time, coming out and to join us over here at the Orange Hat Tech Summit. And for those who are watching online, this is Brian with Kaseya. If you want to get a hold of him, reach out to us. But otherwise, we're going to sign off, and I'm going to go have a taco.
Nice.
So thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.
And everybody online, have a great weekend.
Awesome.